Hello, and welcome to An Idiot Codes episode 8. Now I've got to be honest, in true idiotic fashion, I already made this episode but forgot to record the audio. So, let's start again. First things first, I have removed the ball class, I have removed the paddle class, and I have removed all the sprites. I couldn't be bothered to re-add them because that seemed like a pointless waste of time. Because we're not going to be using them, let's go through and remove everything. All the game objects, all the objectives entirely. We'll keep the controls and the rendering and the text for now. Go into the load content, get rid of all the game objects. Let's go into the update call, get rid of all the updates. And let's go into the draw call and get rid of all the HUD and all of the game objects. So we are basically at a complete blank state, which is all well and good. Let's close sprite font because we're not referring to that for the moment. What we're going to do today is try and make everything a little bit more self-contained. And the way to do that is to take, well, let's import the sprite we're going to use first. Add a new folder, sprites, add an existing item, sprite 00, which you've already seen is a man and an arm. We'll probably just be using the man today. So what do we want here in the game objects? Positioning seems good. Rendering seems good. Well, let's also have public rectangle sprite location. So now we'll be able to determine up front where the sprite is on the sprite sheet. So we can come in and say this is the limits of where the guy is, and we won't need to define that every single time. Another thing we want to do is have a region for parent, end region. The parent in this case is going to be the game1.cs. This is where all the main gubbins of the game work. So let's call that game1. In fact, let's just call it G for brevity because it may get used quite a lot. As I say, positioning's fine, collision for now. I suppose that's fine. We'll leave that to its own business. And rendering, let's also have public vector2 center. This will become apparent later on when we predefine where the center is, and we can use that instead of having to constantly refer to sprite width, sprite depth, over 2, etc, etc. We'll just have one value which we can always point to. So let's establish where G is. Public void init, as in initialization, which will come in here, and that will be run before any other code is run. So we say init game1, and let's say G equals game1. Now the good thing about this is we don't need to call it in the draw call anymore, so we can say goodbye you. It'll have a brief tantrum because it no longer knows what game1 is. We can change that just to G, and everyone's happy again. Now let's do the same thing to get rid of all these extra sprite files, sprite width, sprite height, sprite location, etc. In this case we want that to be a load instead of the initialization. So we go public void load. Yeah, let's take these values and use those. So integer, s width. Oh, let's go with width first, then s height, s lock x, and s lock y. And I forgot to call all of these integers because I'm an idiot. Integer, curly bracket, curly bracket. let's see, we want the sprite file and the sprite location. Well, these are the things we'll need for sprite location equals new rectangle. And what are rectangles again? S-lock X, S-lock Y, S-width, S-height. Excellent. But if we load that, we're not going to end up with a texture. So we might as well bring the texture. This is for a sprite font, but you remember it's the same for a texture. We'll also determine the sprite file here. Say sprite file equals content.load. It doesn't know what content is, but we know where content is. It's in game 1, which is now G. So g.content. It doesn't know what a sprite font is because that's not a texture. Change that to texture 2D. And we want this to be sprites and sprite 00. Now this is a bit broken at the moment because we don't always want our sprite to be sprite.00. So what we can do instead is say string file path, and then here file path. I'll show you how this applies in just a moment. We don't need any update. Everything seems fine at the moment. Do we want a position? Yeah, let's have a position as well. Vector 2 position. No, that's not what it's going to be. Start pos for position, and say position equals start pos. I feel like there's something else I should be doing. Maybe here we can determine where the center is. So the center, should that just be center? Just to keep consistency, let's call it sprite center. Sprite center equals new vector 2. And now we have the width and the height. So it's S width over 2, S height over 2. So when we have the image, it'll look for the path, then it'll look for the X point, the Y point, the width and the height, which we'll all determine in the load, which I will show now. Yeah, I think that's everything. So if we come in here, say game objects, and we will instantiate a game object, man. He will be a new game object. Nothing gets determined there, it's just 2 brackets. Then initialize, we'll have man.init, and that wants game 1, you can see here game 1, so we'll call it this, because all of this here is game 1. Semicolon. Then we want to load in game objects, man.load. Now you see, because we've stacked this all up with all the things we'll need, we can come in here and say the file path is sprites, back, sprite 00. If I remember rightly on my thing here, the width is 20, the height is 30, and it starts at the top left. And the starting position, new vector 2, just go with 200, 200. And close that. And then come down here to the draw, and man.draw. Wait, did I fix the draw call? I did not, but I can do that now. Let's get rid of all these, because we now have all this information determined by the sprite location and the position. So bosh, we don't need any of that. The sprite batch is called from game 1, which is G. sprite file, which we know is the file path. The new rectangle. We want this to be sprite lock dot width and sprite lock dot height. This entire rectangle can be replaced simply with sprite lock, because that's defining the same thing. And then down here we want sprite lock dot width. Actually, this is the origin, so let's just call that center, because we want it to. Oh yeah, we changed it to sprite center. Because we want the origin to be in the middle of the man, not up here at the top left. So moving it to the center is offsetting it to here. Now the draw should work, man.draw. Press play. Hey, there's a tiny little man. Well, that's not very helpful at all. It's kind of helpful. Let's see, how do I make things bigger? So sprite center, I think it's after the origin. If I add another comma, yeah, so float.scale. Make him 10 times bigger. Make him a giant man. Oh, and now something's broken here. So it's changed from wanting a draw rectangle to just a draw position, which is great because we already have that. And just call it position. Does that fix everything? It does. Now if I press play, we have a giant blurry man. And it's so blurry and it's so interpolative that it's, because it's blurry, it's starting to get just the little edge of this arm as well. We don't want blur. Blur is a horrible thing, so let's stop this. Come down to our draw, and this is where we can determine how things scale here in sprite batch.begin. Let's see what the conditions it expects are. Once sprite mode sort, let's see what we've got here. This is the order things are called in, and since I'll be doing it in a list of things front to back for the moment, let's use front to back, which means that everything, if I go man2.draw, then man2 will appear in front of man1. For example, this window is in front of this window, man2 would be in front of man1. But there is no man2 at the moment, so let's get rid of that. Then it wants a blend state. What are these? If I pass null, if I can give it a null, I shall give it a null. There we go. Sampler state. I think this is the one I want. Sampler state. Point clamp. That sounds familiar. I'll try it. And then depth stencil, don't care about null. And rasterizer state, I can null that as well. Now this sampler state should mean that instead of making things blurry as it gets bigger, it keeps sharp lines by scaling it in a better way. Let's see. There we go, a nice crisp clean man, and I don't like turquoise anymore, so I'm going to change it to purple. Yeah. Yeah, man on purple ground. So there you have it. Now we've got all the conditions straight into this one line, and that feeds all the information through into the GameObject class, and everything's grand. The next thing we could add is some movement, and as we did with the ball and the paddles, it'd probably be best to do that in its own specific place. So we will do that next time, but for now we have a man, and the man is stood on a purple background, and he is no longer blurry, and there we are. Next time we will add movement, we will give him an arm, and we will try and get some very basic left-right facing directions, jumping, just a very, very core platformy sort of stuff, because I have an idea for the game I want to make, and it's going to be a 2D side-on thing, but it's not going to be a platformer. but it is going to have a man or a woman. It's going to have people, it's going to be side-on, but it's not going to be a platformer. Until next time, tatty bye.